Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's story is another show-stopping performance by the incredible mind of James Williams, author of The Railroad Through Mad 8 Pass. As ever, please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid crew. And so, with that aside, let's get into tonight's story. Entitled Stone Cold Killers. Part 2. Let's get straight into that. David started coming to some time later. His face hurt and his arms and legs were numb. At first he thought he was dead and hell was getting started on his torture. Then a familiar voice brought him out of that idea. "Damn near shot you, boy. The hell are you doing kicking in my door?" Gerald said, sitting in a chair across from David. David realized he was tied to a wooden dining chair, which explained the numbness. Looking up at Gerald, he glared at the old man. "You killed my brother," he said through his teeth. Gerald raised a brow, but otherwise didn't look surprised. "You don't deny it?" David asked. Gerald sat back in his seat and sighed. "In a way, I suppose I did. If I'd done my job right the first time, your brother would still be alive," he said, genuinely looking disheartened. "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" David asked, a bit confused. Gerald set his shotgun next to David's and got out of his chair. He walked across the room and took a book off the shelf, and with a pocket knife, he leaned over David's shoulder and placed the blade against his cheek. "Any wrong moves?" And he pressed the blade more to emphasize his point. David nodded, and Gerald cut the cord that secured David's hands to the chair. While David worked to free his hands, Gerald sat back down and placed his shotgun back in his lap and then tossed the book to David. David caught the book and looked at the title. Mythological and supernatural beings and entities. "What the fuck is this?" David asked. "Page 287. Read the first paragraph," Gerald replied. Like a groom at a shotgun wedding, David felt obligated to do as told. He turned into the page and started reading. Chapter 32. The Cursed Stone People of the Middle Ages. It is believed that sometime in the late 13th century, a village was visited by a witch. The witch promised good fortune to anyone that welcomed her into their home for even just one night. Now the village accosted the witch, tying her to a post and stoned her to death. Rather than cry out in pain, she cursed them. "For their bloodlust, they shall lust for blood. For the darkness in their hearts, they shall only love the darkness. And for the stones they cast against her, they too shall be cast in stone." Then, as the final rock took her life, the whole town turned to stone. David looked up from the book in total confusion. "I don't understand," he said. "Those statues you boys found, they were the last of the stone people, or stone men, if you prefer. I couldn't bring myself to wipe them out. They were people once and can't help what they do now. I thought if I could help them somehow, or at least keep them from hurting anyone else." Gerald started pouring a glass of single malt scotch for each of them. "I found that iron can damage and ensnare them, while salt is a natural deterrent and dispeller for all things supernatural. Together, they kept them immobile, day or night, until some asshole cut the chains loose," Gerald said, sipping his drink. David picked up the cup, sniffed it, and set it back down. "I'm on the wagon, and it sounds like you need to get on with me," he said, not believing a word of what the old man was saying. "I figured you'd say that," Gerald said, motioning to the television with a remote. He turned it on and hit play. The VCR whirred up and began playing a feed from a security camera. David recognized the face and clothes of the statue that was standing to one side of the edge of the screen. but he didn't recognize its position. This was in a museum in New York, Gerald informed him. As soon as the lights went out and the camera switched to night vision, the statue, it was gone. The fuck? David muttered. The picture changed to a large open room with other artifacts on display. 2 people were walking in this room, one with and one without a flashlight. David deduced that the one with a flashlight was a guard, but who was the other one? The one without was crossing the room towards the guard until the light shone on them, and they froze mid-stride and remained still as the guard approached them. It wasn't until the guard was right in front of the random person that David realized that this wasn't a person, but this statue. The guard turned to shine his light around, but as soon as he did, the statue came to life again, grabbing him up and slamming him to the floor. David watched in shock and horror as the man was beaten, bludgeoned, and torn apart by an animated stone figure. Images of Mark flashed in his mind as he realized that this was the fate of his brother. David's stomach turned, making him retch and fall out of the chair to his knees, and Gerald slid a bucket over just in time as the younger man emptied his stomach. Yep, I did the same thing on my first time. When I was younger, I hunted these things down, but now I'm pretty much spent, he said, groaning as he flopped down in his chair. David wiped his mouth, returned to his seat, picked up the glass, and downed the contents. After a few minutes and a few more shots, David finally spoke up. Why didn't it move in the lights, and why did it kill the guard? He asked in a shaky voice. Well, the rest of the chapter explains that by breaking down the curse. Because they so willingly killed the witch, they're forced to keep killing while trapped inside, with no way to stop themselves. And since they shunned her, they must shun the light, freezing in place when illuminated, Gerald explained. It all came together for David. The box truck had a light on the side. The processing area and cleaning room were lit up, and he'd forgotten to turn off the light before he left. Mark must have turned off the light, but in the end, David was the one that cut the chains and stole the statue. Oh, it's my fault. My brother is dead, and it's my fault, he said, choking up a bit. And Gerald leaned forward, set his shotgun down on the table in front of David, and said, That may be, son. The question now is, what are you gonna do about it? Sergeant Brian Tilley stepped into the room after David left. Everything was scattered about the table, making him sigh in irritation. He straightened everything up and put the file back together so it could go back on the shelf. He was curious as to why David had been asking around about the statue. The description was vague, and as he thought it was strange that David would be asking about merchandise he no longer owned or had access to. Shit, he said to himself. Come on, Jones. I think David is going back out to the warehouse, he said, grabbing his coat. Jones, a rookie in training under Tilley, looked up from his report. But it's the end of my shift and I need to finish. He started but was cut off by his superior. Now, Jones, you can finish that shit when we get back, Brian yelled, and Jones sprang into action. Tilley flashed a wink and a grin at another sergeant, who chuckled and rolled his eyes. The two arrived at the warehouse just before dusk, but there were no vehicles parked outside. Doesn't seem like he's here. Should we go back? Jones asked. That wouldn't be very good police work, now would it? He could have parked elsewhere and walked up, or poured in through the big door. Tilley stated in a matter-of-fact tone, knowing full well he was talking out of his ass. Finding David wasn't the only reason they were there. He wanted to know what was so special about the statue, or if it was even here. He used the key they took from David and opened the door, stepping into the dark space beyond. Jones stepped in as well, and they both turned on their flashlights to see where they were going. Brian went to the switch panel and tried the lights, but nothing worked. Start checking the stacks while I find the breaker box, Tilley ordered, and off they went. Brian started with the offices and bathrooms, but they didn't see anything. In a moment of inspiration, he went back to the switch panel and followed the conduit with his flashlight. I went up the wall and over the offices to a second floor area. Using the wall-mounted ladder, he went up and saw what he was looking for. And just as he got to the breaker box, he heard Jones scream as something crashed and banged around. "Ah, damn it, Jones. We're here to look around, not trash the place. Whatever you broke, you're buying," he said, but didn't get a response. "Jones," he called out, but again it remained quiet. "Jones, answer me now," he boomed. His echoing voice was the only reply. "Ah, son of a bitch," he grumbled and went back to the breaker box, flipping on all of the switches. The lights came on in sporadic patterns throughout the building. "Jones, if you don't answer me when I find you, I'm going to kick your ass from here to next week," he yelled and started walking down the rows of shelves looking for his trainee. About halfway to the back, he saw a beam of light shining across the floor and went to find its source. Rounding into the divide between racks, he saw Jones' flashlight laying on the floor, in a pool of blood and a hand still attached to it. "Holy fuck!" he exclaimed, drawing his pistol and looking around. "Jones, where are you, son? Are you hurt?" he asked, checking the row the light was on. No Jones. Stepping to the next row, there was more blood, as well as a shoe with part of a leg still attached to it. Tilly put his hand over his mouth, trying not to throw up, and finally he picked up his radio. 1099, officer in need of assistance at D&M's. He called and the dispatcher confirmed the code request and address. Tilly followed the blood trail to an open area off to the side. There he found the rest of Jones. His arms and legs had been either smashed or torn off, and his torso had been ripped open, and his head was caved in. There was no holding back the vomit this time as Brian spilled his lunch onto the floor. Looking around, he saw bloody footprints leading away from the scene and around the corner. With his gun up, he gave pursuit, but the trail faded to an end just around the corner. David, where did you go?" he called out. David, being the killer, was the only logical thing he could think of. He'd been the primary suspect of his brother's death until CCTV put him elsewhere at the time of the murder. Now, Tilly was thinking the timing was off and David had killed his brother as well as Jones. The next aisle was an outside edge on the same wall as the door used to enter the building. He could hear footsteps walking down this aisle, but there was something odd about them. It sounded like whoever it was had bricks tied to their feet. He took a breath and swung around the corner with his pistol aiming at the figure near the end. "Hold it," he called. "Put your hands up," he said, slowly stepping forward. The figure turned around, facing him. It wasn't David. In fact, he didn't recognize them at all from his distance in the dark, but it did look like they were covered in blood. "Hands above your head," he ordered, but they only started advancing on him. "Stop! Stop or I'll shoot!" he called, but they started running at him. "Bam, bam, bam!" He fired, but they kept coming, only pausing with each muzzle flash. "Bam, bam, bam!" Tilly fired again, tripping on his own feet as he stumbled back out of the shadows, hitting his head on a shelf on the way down. This dazed him for a moment, affecting his motor skills as he tried to reload his pistol. He looked up, and there they were, standing just inside the shadows. You're under arrest," he mumbled, trying to lift his weapon again, and then everything went black. David stared at the shotgun before him and then up to the old man. "So, they can be killed?" he asked, and Gerald nodded. "Sound infused iron buckshot, in a magnum load. Regular bullets chip away at them, but these babies will blast big old chunks out," he said, setting a box of shells on the table. "Where did you get these? How'd you know all this crap?" David asked, standing and pacing the floor. Gerald laughed and said, "Ha ha ha, I've been doing this most of my life. I've hunted a lot of things that would give you nightmares." What else do I need to know about these stone men?" David asked, sitting back down. "Well, they're damn smart. Been around all these years, standing around watching and learning. They know not to attack groups unless they can split them up. They don't usually work together or coordinate, but, well, they're clever, sneaky as hell. Being made of stone, they're not constricted by lack of strength like we are, and can take a hell of a beating before going down, unless you know what to use," Gerald explained. "But their strength is also their weakness. They go stiff in the light, and with the technology what it is today, well, it makes things easier when it comes to trapping them," the old man said with a grin. David still wasn't fully convinced that this wasn't a hoax. The whole thing sounded too fantastic to be real, but what else could have torn Mark apart like that and not left any evidence? "I don't know. This just sounds too crazy. I mean, that video, that could have been tampered with, and this book," David said, picking it up. "Just a bunch of fairy tales," he said, dropping it back down on the table. Gerald sighed and got up. "Come on, I'll prove it," he said, leading David out the back door, shotgun in one hand and a spotlight in the other. They made their way through the rows of junk and around the back of the last shed where the statues had been. "When I realized what you'd done, I took care of the rest, except this one. I figured if you came back, you might need a little more convincing, so I left it intact," he said, and pointed to a lone statue standing amid the shattered remains of the others. It was wrapped in chains, which the old man started removing. "Help me with this, or let's make a circle around it," he said, to which David reluctantly agreed. They laid the chain on the ground in a ring around 8 feet from the figure in either direction, and then waited for nightfall. It didn't take long, as it was already so late in the day, and with little conversation between the two till then. As the area darkened, Gerald cocked the hammers on his gun and pointed towards the stone man. David watched and waited, but nothing happened. "Figured as much. I knew you were yanking my chain," David said, and started to walk away. And Gerald stopped him. "Step inside the ring. Don't get too close to it. Just step in," he said, and David sighed heavily. "Fine, but if nothing happens," he trailed off, leaving the last part to the imagination. Gerald nodded and stepped off to the side, cradling the shotgun and pointing the spotlight at the statue with his finger hovering over the on switch. David rolled his eyes and stepped into the ring, stood there for a moment, and stared at the statue. Nothing happened. He turned towards Gerald in anger. "See, I knew it was." As he spoke, he heard 3 thumps on the ground. Gerald flipped on the spotlight, nearly blinding him. "What the hell, old man?" he yelled, and then looked behind him. "Holy fucking shit!" he exclaimed, stumbling back out of the ring and falling to the ground. The statue was not only in a different pose, but its arms outstretched in mid-stride, but it was also within inches of grabbing him. "Now do you believe me?" Gerald said, walking over while keeping a light on the statue. David was too stunned to reply, but took the light when it was held out to him and kept it fixed on the figure before him. It stared back at him with an expression of malice and rage. At that moment, he knew that if Gerald hadn't turned on the light, he would have been pulverized by this living work of art. "So, first you trap it in the light, and then you simply," Gerald said, placing the barrel of the shotgun against the figure's head and pulling both triggers. Ba-boom! The gun thundered and sent fragments of stone scattering across the clearing, and with the head gone, the rest of the body cracked and crumbled to the ground. David flinched at the sound of the gunshot and stared in awe at the result, but was still speechless. Gerald knelt down and helped David to his feet, leading him back into the house, where he flopped into his chair. "I'm too old to be chasing these things down. I got no kin, and by the look of you, you ain't doing too good, as you used to," he said, and set the weapon in the young man's lap. "So, if you can clean up the mess you made, I'll let you stay here with me and leave it to you when I pass, he said. David looked at him, confused. Seriously? You just gonna sign over everything? David asked, and Gerald nodded. Yep. You can keep selling this junk to morons like yourself, or learn the tricks of the trade and hunt the things that go bump in the night, he said with a grin. But David didn't have to think about his answer. Well, why not both? He said, and they shared a laugh and shook on the agreement. Might as well stay tonight. You hungry? I'll put on some soup, Gerald said, getting up and heading to the kitchen. Wow. Certainly another one. Wow. As was expected with another James Williams story. Absolutely spine-tingling, expertly executed there. And I can see this being another channel favourite. Big thank you, James, for your incredible support and your incredible dedication and input. Really do get so excited when I see an email from yourself. Guys and girls, you know the drill. As ever, please do let me know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help with the channel and our community further. Why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid crew. If you're an aspiring writer or just want to have a crack at things like myself, then please do get in touch with me at the usual email as on screen, which is dmtforestofear@gmail.com. I really look forward to hearing from you. Well, I hope everybody's having a fantastic week at work or school or studying, whatever it is that you do, and I hope you're keeping fit and focused. But above all, guys, remember, be safe, not sorry.